Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Desktop Discourse number 1. We're hoping to have these out frequently to kind of unpack and talk about a lot of things that are on our mind right now. For our first one, we have some of our beautiful student workers with us virtually from the comforts of our own couches, dare I say from our desktops. Matthew is my name. Yes, silent laughing. I love it. Matthew is me. My pronouns are they and them. Maddie and Matt is also great. In SDI, I am the coordinator of student support and engagement. Joyce, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Joyce. I'm a senior currently at Columbia. And I'm also the president of Columbia Pride, and I'm a student worker at SDI.
Hello, I'm Yanni. I'm a third-year student at Columbia, screenwriting student worker, and one of the head programmers for Movie Mondays. My pronouns are they, them, she, her, with the emphasis on they, them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mikey. I am a student worker at SDI and a third year student at Columbia. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the co-chair of the Trans Student Union.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to talk with you all right now because I think for not only what we're going to talk about today, but overall, you all are very intentional and deep thinkers. So I wanted to have this talk with you all about kind of what LGBTQ spaces are feeling right now, and especially as queer folks, how we're kind of navigating our world right now. So to start, Mikey, this first one is for you. LGBTQ, there's this concept of chosen family, and often that is mentors, close friends, it can be actual family, but people who are chosen family, people who act as our first line of processing really happy joy, grief, really like crunchy things, but our chosen family is often like our core group of people to process all that we do in life. Mikey, what does that look like for you? Is that something that you feel? And if so, how does that look?
Yeah, thank you. I would say that chosen family to me is like, well, it is chosen. First of all, I don't spend a lot of time processing really deep emotions with like my blood family. I have like an okay relationship with my mom, but the two of us are not necessarily on the same wavelength. So my chosen family is my group of friends, my best friend who I've known since high school, my partners, and a few other friends that have just like shown up for me the most, really. And those friends in return, I show up for as much as I can because that's my role to them and that's their role to me.
Thank you. I like how you highlighted a lot on showing up for. I think there's this really constant like investment both ways that chosen family really highlights a lot, in that it highlights a lot how difficult like just processing through life can be, but also how joyous it can be, but nonetheless that there's work to that, right? And there's this showing up for both ways. I think chosen family highlights a lot. Thank you. Yanni, this one's for you. So also, I think a lot about in LGBTQ history, there's a lot of really good writings and historical show-ups in spaces. So I'm thinking of things like historical bars, libraries, coffee shops, online groups, Instagram. there's a lot of importance, I think, in these community spaces. Our own space that we have at, I'll say here at work, but online, SDI, and what those spaces can mean. Yanni, do you have any of those spaces that you have in your life, and what do they kind of look like?
I tend to go to art shows or like seeing my friends play music at their own DIY shows by community organizers who are like trans or gay, lesbian, bi, like all of those things seem to intersect at those points, and I always feel like I'm discovering new artists that way in a way that feels really organic, and I get to be alongside the artists and not kind of like put them up like on a pedestal. And it just feels really down to earth to like be surrounded by people who organize those things themselves, and be able to like surround yourself with artists like that. I feel like a lot of LGBT spaces tend to be kind of covert places that are at night, which is like, I understand for safety reasons, but it would be really great to have more bookstores and like libraries that we could go to, and these are like kind of things that are of the past because of how many parts of gay culture has been like homogenized and commodified to make us feel normal and just like straight people, which I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about it, but I feel like having like a refuge in all parts of the city at all times of the day is like really important for me, and I wish that there was like more access to that other than, you know, just going places at night.
Absolutely. And that like covert piece really struck a chord. I think there's a big history in like, I'm thinking especially of like bars or clubs or coffee shops that throughout decades and up until recently would have like blackout curtains on them, so no one from the outside would look in and see who was inside, or would have names that were really obscure, like really like fancy, or they would use the terms like fluffy, so that it seems this kind of like this ambiguous kind of nightclub thing, but you don't really know that it was a gay club, a lesbian bar, anything like this. And that was inherent often to safety, right? But how much that kind of went through history. Joyce, I'd like to ask you the same thing. Specifically, I think, well, I've seen a lot of your very intentional and deep work with like online spaces. I'm wondering if you could speak about that a bit and what that looks like in like community.
Yeah, so my relationship with my gender and sexuality when it comes to the physical space is interesting, just because I grew up in the burbs, and my suburbs specifically are super religious, super white, and so it's difficult to find physical space here. And like Yanni said, a lot of the spaces that do exist for queer folk and LGBTQ folk tend to be focused on nightlife, which is fine, but it's obviously not for everyone. And at the end of the day, it's not super accessible. A lot of like our daytime events tend to happen during Pride Month, but even then those events tend to be focused on large group gatherings, which again, not super accessible. And so I find a lot of my spaces just virtually and online, just because those spaces tend to be much more easier to access. For me, as a person who does experience a lot of chronic pain, and as a fat person in the community, it's difficult to find community within a group that tends to focus so much on the bodies of people in a really like weird and toxic way. But yeah, it's easier for me, and I guess it's also a form of community and activism that people tend to forget, or they tend to look over, or they think that because it's more accessible that it's easier to manage when it's not. And I think like with quarantine especially, we can all kind of see now that it can be just as difficult to navigate, especially if you're not well versed, I guess, in that sort of communication and outreach.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think I've thought about a lot in all of this how we're very like meaning making people as humans, but often that can get very like simple. I think in history a lot we've had a very rigid view of what activism looks like and what community looks like. And I think as we're talking about now, we know there isn't that rigid boundaries. Like that looks like so many different ways, and I think people are thinking about it right now in very different ways. Albeit if it's something that people have thought about for so long, it looks differently. But I think it's very on people's mind right now. So speaking of kind of right now, we are in quarantine time. I was literally trying to think of like, this is day something, and I don't know. So this is day 4,000 in quarantine. And I think with both my own friends, colleagues, some students, but I think there's this overwhelming sense of loss right now. That can be loss of normalcy, loss of your routine, loss of a concert that you really wanted to go to, loss of your friend groups, loss of your job, loss of like a sense of being able to pay your bills in the ways that you knew how to. This sense of loss, I think, is all very prevalent right now. And I think for me, one of the things I've thought about is, like for all of us, I think, again, our mind tends to go to like judging the size of our loss and feeling like holding almost guilt to that. I think it is hard. We have seen a lot of our peers like lose their jobs right now. But also we have feelings like, I'm very much feeling the loss of like hugging people. I live by myself and I live with my dog, and that is beautiful, but I miss like hugging people. So in that, I wanted to kind of invite you all, if it feels right, to kind of process that, if this sense of loss right now, especially we just talked about like what our spaces can mean to us, what our chosen family means to us. How is loss, if it is, resonating with you right now?
Sorry, I am sharing my space right now. It's not my space to begin with. I think that there's a lot of like loss experience happening right now for sure, but I think that what's really important is to kind of like feel that like more deeply than just like, how can I fix this right now? Like kind of lean into it. And well, what I'm doing at least is like leaning into like why it feels like loss, and like what kind of emotions come about with like the experiences that are currently happening. And like, I don't know, I try to like dig into it as much as possible. Because like, if I am like sitting and stewing in emotions that like I don't want to address, then they're only going to get much more intense, and like, I don't know, they're so much more hurtful after they've been just bottled up for so long. So part of like trying to feel this out, to me at least, has been to reach out to other people through online portals, or the folks that I've been quarantined with, But, you know, just kind of experiencing each other and being present with our own and each other's emotions.
I love that you highlighted, first off, thank you for sharing that. Feeling it. I think as a society, we have a very strained bond with stillness, with doing, like, to feeling our things and to doing nothing. And I think we're kind of struggling with that. And I've heard a lot of this sense of loss of, like, knowing how to process. Like, even, not even the physical losses of, like, the things I lose, but kind of the ways that we have known to process that. It almost feels like we're processing things in a new way right now, too. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about, that I'd love us all to share, is I've been thinking a lot about loss and grief, and how we see it as, I think overall, as a very independent feeling, and we don't think of it as existing with other emotions, with other feelings, with the other depths of who we are. I've been thinking a lot of, grief doesn't mean you can't feel joy. Loss doesn't mean you can't feel very deep, pure joy. And often in times of really large loss, for me, have been times of some of my deepest joys. I think it's how our brains can work to cope. But that in itself is a very organic thing, and these feelings are very intermixed at all times. I think in my work, both in higher ed, in social work, but just in my work of being a queer person in the world, one of the things that I've seen a lot is that everyone is often carrying around something really shitty, and at the same time, they're carrying around, like, pure joy. They're carrying around, like, laughter, they're carrying around jokes that they know, they're carrying around the thoughts of their partner or partners, their friends. They're often carrying around both of these things, albeit they can come up in very different ways at very different times. So my invite to both you all, to myself, and to everybody, as we're processing our loss and how we're processing the ways that we're feeling grief in all of this, is to feel like that really pure joy that we can still feel. I think it's why, at least right now, you've seen so many of our friends turn to, like, the arts, turn to Instagram artists, online YouTube pages, concerts on streaming online, Netflix, Hulu. We're turning the arts, I think, in a way, in a coping way, but also in a way to feel like that pure joy that feels so organically wrapped up in the feelings of grief and loss. All that to say, I would love to know what joy looks like for you right now. Yanni, could I start with you?
I've been turning to a lot of, like, just lesbian media in general, and it just makes me feel really connected to, like, my ancestors or whatever, because it just feels so isolating to be a lesbian sometimes. And then, like, reading about, like, I'm reading Fun Home right now, and I'm reading this, like, poetry book by this indigenous poet, and it's like, it feels like, even though, like, our experiences can be so dramatically different, there's just something that, like, pulls me to them and makes me feel so comforted by the fact that we feel the same things at the same time. And I've been leaning more into, I'm just, like, a very highly selective viewer, and I don't watch a lot of movies because I have very high expectations, but I've been leaning into, like, just, like, mentally investing into films and trusting them, and, like, like being able to enjoy them in a way that I couldn't do that when I was like so tense about schoolwork and stuff like that. And I had very limited time to experiment with what I might enjoy. Like I have like more time to waste, I guess. But also like I cherish the time that I am enjoying something, because I could just be like laying around doing nothing, and I'm using that time to like feed myself like intellectually and nourish, you know, the artistic stuff inside me.
And sometimes that's really hard. I think it's been interesting to wrestle with like the ways I've been finding joy right now, whether that be looking at new mediums of art, spending like a lot of time looking at all this stuff and finding pure joy from it, but recognizing I'm like, wow, it took a quarantine to find time to do that. And I'm hoping for both what you said and how that resonated with me, that we find that time after a quarantine too. Thank you. Joyce, how have you been feeling joy right now?
I don't know. This was kind of a hard question to think about and to come up an answer for, I guess, just because for us, at least here at Columbia, for a lot of people, classes have been completely suspended, but because I was already enrolled in 3 online classes, nothing has stopped for me. So in a way, it doesn't feel too different. Like, it's weird being at home but still having to do homework, but at the same time it feels like a really weird spring break, and I'm still expecting to get on a plane and go back to Chicago. And then I remember I canceled my plane ticket, so I'm like but I've been finding a lot of happiness in just connecting with friends more intentionally online. Like I said, I already spend a lot of my time like virtually and in online spaces, but I don't tend to text much with friends that I can usually see in real life, but now I can't see anyone, and so it's been nice to just sort of be able to continuously keep in touch with people. And my mic. But it's also just been nice to see like the happiness of other people. I've always been the kind of person to be happy when the people I care about are happy, and so being able to see everyone else kind of thrive and live their best lives has been really good for me, I guess.
Thank you. And I'm gonna add, Joyce, your TikToks are on my list of things bringing me joy right now. Because as an old, I don't understand how it works, but I love watching I love them. So thank you. Mikey.
My partner and I have been watching Lost the entire quarantine, because I hadn't like sat down and watched it before, but so we've both kind of talked about, my partner and I have both kind of like talked amongst ourselves about the fact that like the show creates so much emotion that it is a great emotional release, because there's just so much going on at all times. This sounds like an ad. But I don't know. I think finding media that is like, that allows for an emotional release is really helpful. I started producing a cover of From Eden by Hozier, because my cousin had a baby a few weeks ago and her name is Eden. So yeah, so I'm trying to create things and I'm trying to experience real whole emotions with people, and that's been keeping me pretty sane. Yeah, and I try and like check in as much as possible with the people that I care about that aren't like within reach of me right now, because like a great chunk of my chosen family is in this house with me right now. And I wouldn't have it any other way, but it's still important to me to keep checking in with other folks who I care about very much, that I just can't see right now. So yeah.
Thank you. I think, yeah, for me, it's been a lot of, like, Zoom time. Chosen family has been really core to how I process a lot of life, for most of my life. And it was strange to name at first how much being in person meant to me, and how to kind of, like, not fix that, but to kind of address that, and then to still show up, what we talked about at the start, to still, like, show up both ways, what that looks like right now. And I want to extend my gratitude for that, but also something that's been bringing me a lot of joy in this is things like this. People very willing to feel things with other people, and to process that, and to recognize that that's not easy. But I'm very grateful for you all for processing together with all of us today, and with all of us, our whole YouTube community. I'm so grateful for you all, and thank you for your time today. I hope everyone loved our first desktop discourse. We look forward to even more to come, and we wish you all joy, processing, and everything that life has. We will see you soon.